Letter B, preliminary 2018 budget discussion.
Okay, budget. We did have some slides here that we can kind of run through. Just kind of the timeline on where we're at with the budget tonight. You do have an update on the budget. This is the proposed budget that's going to be presented to you. We're looking to do the public notice for the public hearing in early October, so that we can do the public hearing at the October county board meeting. That gives you, committee meetings yet in October to ask any department-specific questions that you may have. We can deal with any issues that come up tonight in those committee meetings. The public hearing for the budget would occur at the board meeting on October 19th, and then you would formally adopt the budget in the November meeting, the special meeting on the Tuesday, November 14th. So that's kind of where we're at time-wise.
Question before we get too far in there. What is the logic with combining a county board meeting along with a public hearing on the budget?
That's when we do in November.
What's that?
We do that in November.
And we've normally done the public hearing, I think, in the November meeting, but if there's any comments that you want to consider in the budget, that's why we moved the public portion back to October, so that if you do hear comments from the public that you want to address within the budget, that gives you a month yet to contemplate those changes.
Is that a change?
I'm just, our meeting's already, this is a short agenda, we're still here an hour. So if we had a public hearing on the budget, are we still gonna give, the necessary concentration that we need for the rest of an agenda for an October meeting? Unless it's a light agenda. That's, my only question is that, because I think a public hearing on a budget, when we have such high demands on our budget, such controversial items that are being pushed forward through this budget, are we giving short shrift to the public to participate? If we give them 3 minutes to comment, are we even inviting public comment then by doing this? That's my thinking, and I'm just wondering what the logic. If that's the way we've always done things, that's clearly, not the most logical method to go forward, but that's just my concern.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's not the way we've always done things. We've moved it back to give the public more opportunity or you more time to consider interest from the public. So
I just want to make it known that I have the same concern that the other people do. I have the same concern about having the public being able to speak and get their things out there besides our meeting. It's just.
But remember, they all have representatives on the county board that they can communicate with and get information from them and share.
Sometimes I can't repeat what's been shared to me from the constituents, so just saying.
well, this is the proposed structure. If you have changes, we can do something different, but that's what we've outlined so far. So getting into kind of the overview of the budget, this is the tax rate history. You'll see that in the 2018 budget that's being proposed, the tax rate is just slightly lower than what it was last year. And we'll get into the reasons for that. The proposed levy comes from a couple different components, one being the total operating levy, which we are limited with levy limits as to what that operating levy can be. And then the special purpose levy, those are things that fall outside of those levy limits, and we'll talk a little bit about what those are. But you can see that in the 2018 proposed budget, the total proposed levy is $10,836,963, which is up slightly from the adopted budget last year. The levy limits, so we're digging a little bit deeper into the detail now to see what the components of those levies are. The operating levy, the $9.8 million, that is the portion of the levy that is limited by the levy limits. Those things that fall outside of the levy limits include, the library services, the bridge and culvert aids, and the EMS portion of the levy. So those other components that fall outside the levy limits are what bring us to the total allowable levy of $10.8 million. And then for comparison's sake, put the approved levy from last year on there, so we're increasing about $168 thousand or 1.58% total levy increase, although it does result in a slight tax rate decrease. A little bit more detail, gets a little bit wordy. You can see as we dig deeper in, the font gets smaller, so that eventually will just be unreadable. But the EMS levy comes from these components, and I think you've got some of this in your packet as well. But, and we put in the comparison from last year as well. A couple of notable items there. The allocation of equipment related to the EMS runs through that. There's a new ambulance being purchased that is about $170,000. We did have some funds that we had levied for a couple of years ago for an ambulance that we didn't spend all of. I think we either didn't buy one that year or refurbished one, but we had $101,000 left in that capital line item, which we are applying that fund balance to the EMS levy to reduce the amount that we're levying for this year due to those unspent funds from prior year. So the total EMS levy is about $600,000 this year, and you can see the tax rate on the bottom that results from that. I just wanted to touch on compensation. You know, we implemented a compensation plan back in 2015, and when it was implemented, you know, that was kind of a scary number as far as what was needed to fund the compensation package at that time. So when it was implemented, it was not really fully implemented when it was brought in 2015. But in 2016, as you recall, we did just a 1.5% across the board wage increase. We didn't move people through the steps. You know, that was kind of a time of turmoil, and we didn't have a finance director. You changed your form of government, and so the implementation didn't really occur at that time either, but we did do a 1.5 across the board increase to try and keep up with the market rates. We did do a market rate study in 2016, and we found that you know, if the compensation was just slightly below the median market rates for our size government. So in 2017, we did more fully implement that plan by granting step increases to employees on their anniversary date for those that were below the control point. And we did grant an additional step to those long tenured employees. As you recall, there were some people put in the grid that had been here a number of years, but may have been at step one in the compensation. And so we're trying to recognize their value to the organization by giving that additional step. There was no increase for those people above the control point at that time because we used the funding just to get some of those people caught up that were not at the market rate. So we didn't give increases to those that were already above market rates in 2017.
So there was no raise percentage?
There was no raise percentage for those above the control point. There wasn't an across-the-board increase, but there was steps. We did start to move people through the steps. So people are hired at a step, and then they move on their anniversary date up to the market rate, and we haven't funded anything above the market rate to date. So for 2018, what we are proposing is again doing a 1.5% across the board wage increase. This is again a full increase, whether you're below or at or above the market. That keeps all of our pay plan relatively current with market rates. And so that increase would be given to even those above the control point. Again, that just moves the whole grid along and keeps us current with market rates or close to current. We would continue progressing employees that are below the control point through the steps. One of the issues with funding the plan as it exists is those steps. The steps are 2.5% increases between the steps. So that gets to be quite a lot of money to fund that when the steps are 2.5%. And to keep the whole grid current with any kind of an increase, say in this case of 1.5%. So, you know, we're trying to modify the pay plan so that we can fund it and keep current by increasing across the board, but by moving people through the steps. And what we're proposing is to make the steps 1.25%. That is, add a step in between each of those steps, so that we can still give the step increases to employees as they move to market, but still not lose the integrity of the entire plan by not moving to market rates with an overall increase. So that gives people below the control point, what they were kind of thinking they were going to get with their step increase below, before, yet it does allow us to keep current with the whole pay plan.
Are these based on any evaluations we're doing annually, or are we getting raises with all the evaluations?
It's not a performance-based plan. This is steps on anniversary dates up to market, so getting up to market above the market rate. We haven't moved anyone through the steps, but you can see the other bullet point there is to contemplate creating ranges above the control point instead of steps. So the idea there is not to automatically move people through the steps, but to have some process to reward people that are doing above and beyond. And we haven't worked out what that process could be yet, but the idea there is to remove that automatic step for those above the control point and get some kind of plan where good workers can be rewarded a little bit more fairly.
Based on performance.
Correct, yes, or yes, something like that. Okay, and all these increases are currently just in one line item in contingency, just to park them there because we've been kind of changing the numbers as we've been kind of jostling along here, but then eventually the number will be spread to the individual departments, just so you're aware of that. Changes in proposed positions. There are a few things that are being proposed changed in FTEs, or full-time equivalent employees. I'll start off with the Sheriff's Department. The proposal there is to add one full-time equivalent courthouse security position. As you recall, we did create a position and funded that with existing dollars in the 2017 budget, and pending how that worked out, you have the option of creating that as a permanent position. So in the budget, there is that FTE for that security position to remain full-time if in fact that is your intention. There's also a proposal to add one jailer position. As we looked at the budget and as suggested by jail staff and the sheriff's staff, we do run through a lot of part-time jailers. It's hard to keep them. We're doing a lot of overtime. If we had one more full-time equivalent jailer, we're thinking that it would not only, it's about neutral as far as costs go, but it does help the training and hiring and retaining of existing staff. The other suggestion here, as you may recall, there was a full-time employee in the Sheriff's Department that moved on to another city. We took that position and kind of split it in half and left half of it in the Sheriff's Department and created a half-time human resources individual. The proposal here is to keep moving that position into human resources, creating a full-time human resources position, and transferring some of those positions that were in the Sheriff's Department. Those are related to IT and budget and some dispatch duties, but cover those with existing staff. This did have the approval of the previous sheriff. We're kind of between a rock and a hard place of, officially doing that with the Sheriff's Department. I know the chief has some reservations about making any changes before a new sheriff comes on board, but we think that this is a way to add that needed value of having a full-time human resources person without having to add dollars to the budget to get that done. And I think this is kind of the wave of the future that we will need to consider as we move forward in doing things differently rather than, the same old way. So this is a way that we think that we can accommodate a real need within the organization in keeping up with human resource activity, but not adding to the budget to do that.
What position was taken away or was lost, say, from the Sheriff's Department?
Well, it wasn't law, there's Rose Lilywood is currently in that position, so she's working half-time on sheriff duties and half-time on HR duties. So that position still exists, it doesn't go away, but the duties for that position would all be human resource related instead of half sheriff and half human resource. Okay? Okay, so then on the administration side, I would accept that half-time position to create that full-time human resource position. We do have money budgeted for up to one FTE criminal justice coordinator type position. That has been a need that has been suggested and recognized as needed, so that is in the budget. There's also funding for up to one FTE corporation counsel or attorney designee. I put the statutory reference in there. There is different ways that we can handle that. I talked with our current corporate counsel about suggestions that we're hearing from the board on additional needs on the legal side. Don't know exactly how that's going to fall out, but it could be up to having a person on staff to be corporation counsel. That would be the most expensive, also get the most service. We would have representation at committee meetings or board meetings when needed, and we'd have someone on staff to help with other legal issues that come up regarding contract review and other issues. We could handle that kind of like what we do now by having an attorney designee, whether it's the same one we have now or someone else. But I think what the intention is here is to recognize that we've had some legal issues that perhaps if we would have had more representation at the right time, that we would be better off. So that's the intention. The district attorney has proposed adding a half-time victim witness coordinator. We already have a half-time. This would be making that person full-time. And the way the funding works from that, it would be virtually not a hit on the budget because we do get state funding for that. So that's a relatively no-cost item, but gives them a full-time person as the victim witness coordinator. On the Health and Human Services side, I put in parentheses there eliminating an AODA counselor. I did that in parentheses because that was the request to have 2 AODA counselors as they had in the past. In the 2017 budget, they combined those 2 into one position, but at a higher paid position. That position is currently vacant. They had originally proposed separating that back out into 2, but due to budget constraints and trying to figure out what we're doing with the clinic and what makes the most sense, we eliminated one of those so that there still is one open counselor position that remains to be filled, and we're scheduling interviews for that currently, actually. And then the one FTE that comes over from the Senior Resource Center, that was something that happened earlier this year again, but that would be a full-time county employee instead of working through the Senior Resource Center. It would actually work within the building then most of the time as well. Excuse me. On the same kind of line of staffing, UW Extension, these are not county employees, they're actually state employees, but they are changes to staffing levels in Extension. We talked about this in economic development extensively. We had Dave Berard come in and put in his 2 cents worth as well. But what we would end up with as proposed for Extension is 1 communities extension educator. That's a full-time position that's funded 1/3 by LCO. We would keep that position. The youth and families extension educator, we would have a half-time person dedicated to that. There used to be 2 ag extension educators, 1 retired this past year, so we suggest eliminating the funding for that 3rd position, but retain the 3rd position that's already there, and that is a person that has been helping us in that capacity over the years. The 4-H program coordinator kind of got split off, with the changes to Extension. Lori Labrie was the director. She also did the 4-H programming. The director position kind of goes away as they have now a regional person that does that kind of activity, which is state funded. So the thought is to have the 4-H program coordinator at halftime with the youth and families extension coordinator, maybe combine those into one full-time person that would share those kind of duties. The total cost for extension for the staffing portion anyway would be about $86,000. That's down from $107,000 in 2017.
So Tom, we're still gonna have an ag extension educator though? I mean, we have two.
Yes, we had
Otto retired.
Kevin and Otto. Otto retired. Kevin would still be performing that function in that capacity.
With 2 other counties.
Yes. 3 total. Yeah. Okay, and we've got staff here that can answer more specific questions if we've got them. Yes.
So are you saying that our extension department, their boss will be from some other county?
Well, they used to have directors, and we had our director here in-house, but now Lori Baltrusis has been hired as the regional director, and she is in charge of five counties to perform the administrative duties that the local director previously did. So Lori Baltrusis will be functioning as kind of that director and help coordinating these activities. So as we decide what it is that we need from these individuals, Lori will help make sure that we have the staff or other resources, whether it's somebody outside of this staff that can help with extension-related activities. Did I state that okay?
Sure. Okay. I guess I have a question for Lori. Lori, who's our community extension educator?
That's
And it says
currently,
LCO shares that person?
yep,
Or is it-
that's currently a REGA.
Oh,
Titles have changed with things, but instead of a Conrad agent, it's now called a communities extension educator. But that's a REGA's position.
Okay. And we're gonna combine the 4-H with the youth and family educator?
Yeah.
Do we have that person? Or we?
No, I was your family living educator,
Right.
and Lori was 4-H. And so what's proposed then is to combine that position. And just historically, that was a position that was combined years ago, that we talked about at the committee as well.
So that's no longer you, then you're the department director.
Yeah, I'm what's called the Area Extension Director, so I am now with Barron, Burnett, Washburn, Sawyer, and Rusk. And so to your point, Jim, that's my job now is to be that administrative person for a 5-county area. And so my office home is in Spooner, but I'm traveling between those 5 counties. Usually about once a week, I'm in the different counties, sometimes longer, sometimes smaller.
So what happens, I don't know, but something, somebody needs to make a decision. There's gonna be somebody here that's can make a decision if need be?
Yep, so I'm in constant contact with Tom. I think today was one of those examples. He shoots me an email and says, are you available to talk? And I give him a call. So just because I'm not here in the building every single day doesn't mean I'm not available and reachable.
Was that on your Samsung tablet?
I was on a telephone.
In Athol Sawyer County, you can't get your cell phone.
I recall this as being nothing new. The state proposed it 3 years ago, if I remember right.
Yeah.
This isn't anything new.
No, as you all know, probably everyone in this room knows, Extension's been steering the ship a little differently for the last few years. So this is the new thing that's been rolled out over the last couple months of new positions and what that looks like. And for counties who are strapped with their budgets, trying to be creative with how to really get you what you need. And understanding that you're still losing auto, you're still losing that expertise and that person that was devoted to grazers you know, a different kind of farms and cows and dairy and that kind of thing. So that's not something that Kevin can pick up and do. His specialty is more horticulture. So, you know, we're trying to get really creative then with how to utilize some state specialists, and all of that is still being in the works as well. So there is a loss, you know, like we've been saying all along, we can't do more with less anymore, like everyone else, so.
So who's our nutrition person now that you
Yep.
used to do?
Yep, Lisa and Kim are still on board. They're with SNAP Ed and Food Wise. They're not listed on here because that you don't pay for that. That's federal funding. So they're still here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another thing I wanted to talk about was health insurance. This is also related to staffing, but when we went into the budget, we were anticipating about a 5% increase in health insurance costs. And what we did, again, is hired a firm called Horton Group. They do RFPs and that sort of thing, looking at health insurance. They know health insurance inside and out. They helped us prepare an RFP, went through the process with us. We got responses back. We were able to get a renewal quote of no increase at all, a 0% increase. We had to go back and re-ask. Actually, one of the firms came in a little bit less than that. Group Health decided to match that, so we're down to a 6% savings over the previous quote that they gave us, or this year's rates. So we went from a 5%, having a budget of 5% increase, to a 6% decrease. So that saved us a couple $100,000, which is represented in the packet that we gave you previously. There are some slight changes to get from here to there, and that 6% increase. We've got 3 health insurance plans that we offer, 3 different deductible plans and premium plans. We reduced that to 1 plan. We only have 3 individuals that are taking an alternate plan, so it's not affecting a great many of the employees, but yet it does help us reduce the administration and the costs of providing this coverage. So we'll cover that with employees when we do open enrollment, but the good news here is that we're reducing our health insurance costs. One of the reasons for that is we did have a bad year a couple of years ago, a bad cost year, and of course, health insurance companies raise rates when you cause them to spend a lot of money. So it's easier for them to raise rates than to reduce rates, and so this Horton tells us is kind of a resetting. You know, we had a good year this past year. This helps us recapture some of that good rate or good exposure that we had this past year, and they were able to reduce the rates because of that. So that's the one bright spot we have. Outside organizations. Now these again are organizations that we fund that fall within the operating levy. So the requests that we got, if there was more requested, we generally kept that the same as last year. Again, we're in a tight budget, and we at the administrator's level did not increase funding except where it was needed. So you see the library, Northern Waters Library, we dealt with that last month. Sawyer County Fair, we funded them at $26,016. We approved them at $31,250 last year. They requested $35,000 this year. I think they did last year as well, but we funded them at $31,250, which is the proposed, that's the number that's in the proposed budget for this year. So those numbers in red are changes that I made from the requests that came in. Senior Resource Center likewise had a request for $130,000. There was some issues with what they had presented. I think they had doubled up the request for the grant portion or something, and then they had some other changes. But we left that at the $91,892, which we funded last year. The Hayward Lakes visitors, they did request $43,500. They got $43,500 the last couple of years. The reason that's in red is the way that we're doing that. Historically, that has been a general fund kind of operating levy. What we're proposing is that this be the last year that we fund the Hayward Lakes Visitors and Convention Bureau. This is one of the only areas that has an alternate source of funding available to them, which would be the room tax. The room tax is something that the county cannot enact. It's not a county function, the room tax, but townships can enact a room tax. And there have been 2 or 3 that have enacted a room tax, and there are room tax dollars coming in to the Visitors Bureau. But if all of the townships within Sawyer County enacted a room tax, they would fund the $43,500 and probably more. So the suggestion is here, the proposal is to fund that one more year in 2018. That funding would come from resource development. One of the uses of resource development fund is for significant economic improvement, which would potentially qualify for that use of funds. But what we would do if you are willing to do that is put a resolution in front of you with a budget that would state that we strongly suggest that you enact room tax at the township level, and that would be the source of funding for the Visitors Bureau.
Tom, right now, there's only one township or 2 townships that are,
I think there's 3. It's the town of Hayward, Lenroot, and
Hayward, and the city.
City of Hayward. Okay.
Tom, you said there's room tax money coming in now?
So there,
You think next year could fund that entire amount?
that's what we're hearing from, like the Hunter. If Hunter enacted room tax, it would probably cover that by itself. There's, and that's an estimate. But that would be people coming into the area don't ask, is there room tax on this? I'm not going to stay there because you have room tax. It could be like a 4%. I think you're allowed up to, I don't know what it is now, 8 or 10%, but they wouldn't even have to go that high. They could set it at, the suggestion is 4%. I think that's what the city is currently. But that would be a source of funding for the Visitors Bureau and would take it off the county tax levy to provide that service. It's the resorts that benefit from that service. They're doing marketing for the resorts. It kind of makes sense that that they are willing to, or should be willing to, administer the room tax. It's not coming out of the resort owner's pocket. They're just collecting it, the extra amount, and then forwarding that on to the state, which provides it to the Visitors Bureau, I believe. But it's just an administrative process, much like sales tax is for the resorts. So it's not an overly burdensome kind of thing to administer.
Have you considered tapering that or stepping our way there? Instead of going 43.5 to nothing, what if we cut that in half this year? Is there funding there to cover the other half?
Well, I think at this point, for the Visitors Bureau to change their funding source at this point might be tough for 2018, but I think, that was the idea behind the resolution. If we made it known that, you've got to find alternative sources of funding, they're willing to go out and state their case that is a good thing to do, is to have a room tax. And if they know the funding is going away, it might give them a little extra push to get that done. It's been tried before, 3 townships or cities have done it. But that's the idea here. Okay, regional planning, we had the presentation from them and the services that they provide. We talked with Nemekog Transit. That's $150,000, has been each and every year. Talked extensively with Karen, and she schooled us on the funding that they would lose out on if we cut that, because they get state and federal funding based on the match that we provide. So we take away $1, they lose $10, or what is it? It's substantial.
Substantial.
So we did not reduce that at all.
And the tribe matches to 165?
Yep.
165,000.
Thank
So
you.
the portion.
Okay. these are things that you can talk about and change. This is the proposal coming before you within the proposed budget. Likewise, on the special levy side, the library's levy portion falls outside the levy limits. But you can see the Hayward Library, approved $148,000 for them last year. They requested $200,000 this year. We cut that in half, mainly because they had a debt payment to us, which is now paid off. That was about $25,000 a year, thinking that they should have other funding available. We do have board representation on their board. If there's others that want to speak to that, you're welcome to. I didn't change the number for the winter library, depending on what happens with the Hayward Library, but there was talk about whatever increase or decrease happens with the Hayward Library, that same percentage should happen with the winter library. So that is not reflected in that winter number, which is why it's in red, depending on what happens with the Hayward Library. So depending on where you want to go with those, we can shorten them, both of them up.
I still, the winter library and the Hayward library are supposed to be the same percentage. Is that what that's figured out to?
No, that's what I was just alluding to, is that it's not in there currently because I'm not sure that $174,000 number is what you're gonna end up with. I mean, if it is, then we need to change the winter library number if in fact you do want to keep those percentages the same. So both of those numbers are subject to change. I think from the talk that we've heard in committee is that the intent is to keep the winter library percentage equal to whatever the Hayward Library percentage is. And so that winter number will need to change depending on the Hayward Library number.
I have a comment. I think better to look at what percentage of cost the county's funding for the Hayward Library and for the winter library. If my memory's right, we're funding a substantial portion of the winter library's needs. And at that level of 174, we would be funding just a little bit over 50% of the Weiss Community Library.
So that's something.
I don't understand. What did you say?
Well, what I'm saying is that the Winter Public Library has, I'm going to say, $100,000 of expenditures. The county is funding, well, I think 80, 90, I can't remember the exact numbers, but we're funding a substantial portion of their expenditures. I'm going to say somewhere around 80%. Whereas for the Weiss Community Library, even at the 174, we're funding about, I'm going to say 55% of their expenditures.
And how does that, what is the, I'm missing what that analysis adds to this budget allocation.
Well, what the analysis says is that both libraries should be funded at the same percentage of their costs. And I'm not suggesting changing the Weiss Library, but I'm suggesting that since the winter library is getting a substantially more of their costs funded by the county, and they ask for $58,149, then I think we should just leave it at what they asked for.
Let's just leave it.
I've got a problem with all these percentages that are floating around. Trying to fund two different libraries at the same percentage, whether it's a percentage of their total budget or the percentage of increase for any given year, does not make sense to me. Should one of those libraries have a catastrophic event, a fire, a tornado, they're going to need one heck of a percentage increase in their funding to get themselves back on the feet. Does it make sense that we would give the other library that same additional amount when they didn't suffer the fire or the flood or the tornado? No, this is not, we've got apples and oranges, we can't compare them to each other all the time. I'm opposed to this percentage funding. Thank you.
Okay, so that can, further discussion. This is just the overview of the capital improvement plan. You do have that on paper on your desk, so I won't go into detail with this, but the point here is that we put in the beginning and ending fund balance in each of the 5 years of the capital improvement plan. And so at the end of 2018, with the proposed budget in there, we still have a balance of $205,000 in the capital improvement fund. But you can see in the subsequent years, we go into the negative, which means that we're not funding what we are proposing that we need in future years. So that is one of the issues that we'll need to shore up in future years, is how are we going to fund those capital improvements that are needed. And that's in addition, if we ran the operating budget out, for 5 years, we'd see the same type of thing. We'd see the increases that we're contemplating aren't going to match our revenue sources due to levy limits and other restraints. So this is the constant challenge that we will have, is funding not only on the operating side, but on the capital improvement side as well. That was the last slide that I had. You've also got a packet of paper on your desk today that kind of summarizes the adjustments that we have done. As you recall, we asked for department requests early on in the process. Those requests came in from departments about $10.8 million. Our operating levy is only $9.8 million, so we had to reduce from the requests $935,000, which are itemized on the top page of the handout that you were given this evening. There's a line across the middle of the page. Those things above the line are the things that we discussed at the last county board meeting we had in winter. The items below the line are items that we added since that time, so that we could make the changes necessary to get down to that allowable operating levy of $9.8 million. So you can see that the proposed budget currently stands balanced with the changes that are in here. Just want to touch on some of the things that are below the line, since we haven't discussed those as a full board yet. The first one being that the corporation council, that funding for a position was added once we found out that the grant for the criminal justice fell through, so we needed to add funding for it. One of the positions that was added. So the corp council, $83,000 was added to the budget. Criminal.
I thought we said we could do that for 60.
Well, there's one option that we could do to hire an attorney firm for 60. That was one of the possible proposals. If we did it with a full employee, it might be more than that. So we were trying to fund at the highest level that would be contemplated, which would be a full employee. If we can do it cheaper than that, that's great. We can do it part-time, maybe, but this is funding for a full-time corp counsel.
And you recently emailed us what we had spent in the previous years with our council.
Yes.
What was that again? I didn't remember. This ballpark, I don't think it was 80,000. Was it?
Well, yeah, there's some corporation counsel costs, and that range from $50,000 to $25,000. We also use HR attorney for those types of things, and that's in the neighborhood of about $20,000. And then we did have some specialized attorney fees that we paid for specific purposes as well. And the corp counsel that we get now is, we're not going to find a cheaper rate than what we're getting now. And, he only works for us when we ask specific questions of him. So I think, the cost to do something different would increase if we wanted to do something different for corporation counsel. But I think the intent is there to get a different level of service with the dollars that we spend.
But is it true we're still going to need specialized services even with our corporate counsel?
Yes, I
Jim, you told us that you don't get one person to handle all the cases.
Well, corporate counsel, what they would do is handle as much as they could in-house, but if there was, either complex litigation or something that would require, more of a specialty, then you would bring in outside counsel for that. what you do with corporate counsel is you try to minimize the expense of having outside counsel. And I don't know exactly the framework we have with our current corporate counsel, but if we have them on a need of a question only, we're kind of missing the preliminary analysis, because what you want is when you're at the decision-making level or you're at the preliminary discussion level, you'd want some legal guidance as to help shape what the decision is going to be, rather than us making a decision and finding out later on, and this is the short-term boarding house, episode that happened where we ended up spending a lot more money on the back end of it, trying to fix what could have been handled with some, direction on the front side. That's where corporate counsel comes in. There are some things you can't avoid, because you also don't want your one attorney being bogged down with, litigation, discovery, scheduling orders and whatever else when it goes to more complex litigation. I know corporate counsel right now it handles some of the child support and some of the more, I don't know what you call it, kind of appearances that when you do for child support. And it's not litigation per se, right? It's like hearings, you handle the hearing side of it. And I'll look at Tom because he's clearly got more experience on any of this. But
Termination, rights.
right. And so you handle those.
Because he has a full-time corporate counsel, now you need a staff also.
Right.
So we haven't factored that in at all.
Doing it all the time.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm being an attorney and being someone who was hired in a previous position to bring this kind of benefit, there was a realization of somewhere close to like $1 million in terms of what the expenditures were, and they work in that general practice, so that diminishes a lot of the specialized costs. So so what was the example? I talked to Tom about this. So we had some labor law issues of which a firm needed to be brought in, and when you bring in a firm, you're hiring them at, you're paying whoever's doing that work for you. So if it's an associate, you're paying at a somewhat different rate. If you go into a partner level, you're paying a larger, and then when I say rate, you're talking about an hourly rate based on what their work is. And so that was a labor law dispute. Then we had some zoning issues. Then we had potential litigation regarding, there's different types of ways that attorneys are used. And so you end up hiring specialty attorneys to come in and handle that. And then your cost goes from, it exponentially explodes. So that's it's 10 words with 1 word of work, right? Is it exponentially?
So we're gonna get a full-time attorney for $83,000.
No, I think that's just budgeted for the idea, because we're speculating as to what we can do. I mean, there's a couple different ways. I think what we're trying to do is allocate a space in the budget, because my next question is going to be the $25,000 that we're putting in criminal justice. And then I think we're going to burn part of the building down, in response to what I think the answer is going to be. So what I think what we're doing is we're trying to clear out some space so that we have an ability to negotiate, or at least have some negotiating space for what we're trying to hire. And if we can get someone at 60, well then, it's easier to put back 23,000 than it is to hire someone at 150, and then we end up trying to find another 80. So I think that's where the 83 number is coming from.
Yes. Moving on.
Wait, one more time, sorry. Have we considered offering our current corporate counsel a little more money to work more with us? Is that?
Yeah, I've had a couple of discussions with TJ Duffy, and, he's willing to do more. He's basically working when we ask him to do something. And so if we don't ask him, he doesn't do something. And he gives us a good rate. That's why I say we're not going to find another attorney that's going to work at that rate. He does provide good service for us, and it augments his business, and that's a good thing for him, and it's a good thing for us. We could ask him to do more. We could ask him to attend committee meetings or look at things more than we do now, which would increase the cost. So that is an option, and that's one thing that we talked about. More of what we have now, more of something different, or a full-time employee. And we haven't had a lot of discussion to flush that out totally, but those are kind of the ideas that we're looking at. So the proposed budget has worst case scenario for court counsel. Hopefully, worst case.
Sawyer.
And staff, as mentioned by Supervisor Duffy?
There is no administrative staff contemplated with that currently. We also have, we've been running without an HR director. We're trying to get one of those. They will not have staff. Other counties have HR director and HR generalist and administrative staff. We've got, an administrator that doesn't have administrative staff. There's, we can do it, but then you're gonna, what are you gonna cut out? I guess is the question. So, yeah, we've got areas in the county, not just in administration, but in other departments that are running without administrative staff. Or support, I should say. Or reduced support.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
so I got asked about the criminal justice allocation.
Okay, I'm moving on. Did you have another question? Did that not answer your question, or you don't have a question?
Oh, that answered my
Okay,
question.
very good. Okay, so moving on. The next item is actually a reduction in the levy because of a contemplated contribution from the tribe for the criminal justice position. So we originally had so much that we needed for levy, contemplating that there may be contribution from the tribe for that purpose, reduces the amount of the levy by an estimated $25,000.
We have discussed that, and we're gonna share this position.
We're in preliminary discussions of what that means. And so, I'm a little curious as to how that number is coming up, but we should also be careful that we don't commit before we've had the conversation. So, I
Okay?
mean, that conversation's happened, but
It hasn't passed the,
Right.
Sometimes things take time to change.
Well, and we haven't passed the position either. This is the contemplation, how is this gonna fit together? We don't have a position, you haven't committed to funding, how does this work? Are we gonna have a position, and if we do, how is it gonna be funded? This is the idea that's before you now. If we need to do something different, then we need to juggle the numbers, but at the end of the day, the difference at the bottom's gotta be zero. So we can manipulate anything you want to do as long as we stay in balance. The UW extension carryover, that is a carryover from this budget because we have open positions that we're being billed for by extension. We'll have a credit that carries over to help fund the next year. The changes I mentioned in the AODA clinic and the counselor saves us a bit of money. Our health insurance, that is an additional reduction in costs in addition to the amount, $140 that was reduced on the first go-around with the health insurance. The 43.5 was originally contemplated within the general fund levy, doing a one-time reclass to fund that out of resource development is being contemplated there. The highway department has had a couple of good years where they have increased their fund balance dramatically. This budget contemplates using $200,000 of that fund balance to fund the highway operations. I had discussions with Gary Gedhardt about reducing his budget because he did have a healthy fund balance generated the last couple of years. We think this is a good alternative rather than reducing his budget, which reduces his levy forever. We'll try this year and just reduce the fund balance, leave his budget the same. We end up with the same reduction in levy, but we'll find out what we want to do with highway into the future with that. Then a couple other adjustments, the increase in contingency. We had cut down contingency quite a bit when we were jostling numbers around. With these other reductions, we bumped contingency back up a little bit. And then we had an estimate in there for tax deeds. That's a revenue source that we get, and we reduced that a little bit, which increased the need for the levy. So So those are the changes that are currently in the proposed budget. That gets us to a levy that's within our allowed operating levy. Again, we'll discuss that again in committees and at the public meeting in October, but we wanted to get this in front of you so that you can contemplate anything else that you want to do differently. This is your policy document, but just be cognizant of any changes that you make must still remain in balance. And you certainly have the opportunity and prerogative to make changes as long as we stay within that operating levy.
Good job. It's nice to see that you have a balance, that's important.